Welcome to the Success is Subjective podcast series brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilley Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilley. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Adam McLean. Adam McLean, PsyD, serves as the Director of Business Development for the Guest House. Dr. McLean attended California University to complete his doctorate in clinical psychology. Dr. McLean continues to research positive psychology, trauma, and addiction in an effort to be an advisor for those with maladaptive coping behaviors and their families. Dr. McLean first began providing client services in community mental health for a nonprofit in northern Arizona. He assisted in creating a long-term extended care program that combined an outdoor adventure experience with traditional treatment modalities. In continuation with his passion to help those with substance use disorder, Dr. McLean created a long-term treatment center for young adults focusing on substance use disorder and collegiate recovery. Adam's education and experience has allowed him to help hundreds of families get their loved ones into treatment. Outside of working in behavioral health, Adam enjoys spending time with his son, Jack. I really enjoyed this interview, and Adam's a really interesting person, and his story was surprising to me. So let's not wait any longer. Here's Adam. Adam, we're on. Thanks again for doing this. I'm super excited. I know we've met a couple times at conferences and had conversations over the years, but mostly from a professional perspective. So I'm actually really excited to hear more of kind of your personal journey. So thanks for being willing to be on this, whether you're excited about it or not. But I'll stop talking. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners, where did you grow up? And what was kind of the messaging that you were getting from your family as well as the community in which you were raised about the idea of post-secondary education?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joanna. And it's good to see you, and thanks for inviting me. And as the chairman of your fan club, I'm just excited for the opportunity to hang out for a little while. I was raised in Flagstaff, Arizona. It's a little ski resort town, college town. And there wasn't a lot of expectations regarding education for me. It wasn't like imposed on me that, it's like, oh, you're going to grow up and to be a doctor or anything like that. It was mostly, there were societal norms, like that messaging definitely came my way. And the narrative that was taught to me was, in order to have a life that has opportunity and also the ability to make more money, is that you're going to go to college and then get a job and work 9 to 5 and probably be slightly miserable, most of your life if you do that. Right? Like that's like the narrative, right? That's like when you watch like Home Improvement or shows like that. And that's really where a lot of that messaging came from, was like, pop culture cinema at the time. But as things progressed in my life, I don't remember really if there was any messaging around education in my, younger elementary years. But as I got a little bit older, closer to like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, the presentation of like ADHD symptoms and anxiety definitely started rearing their ugly heads. And once that started occurring, everybody was just happy if like I went to class, and didn't get suspended. So once that kicked in, nobody was really driving home the concept that like I needed to go to college. So that's how that occurred for me.
Well, that makes sense. Right? You're like, how can you think about the future if right now is the struggle, right? Like the idea of choosing to go to more schooling when required schooling is a challenge. I mean, that makes complete sense. And I also just love that you dropped the Home Improvement pop culture reference, because I feel like only those of us who grew up in that age or like time period will understand that reference. And I love it.
Yeah. And, so Ericksonian psychology, they have these developmental stages that are really relevant and pertinent to how a person will progress through their ego states. And that critical age of like 12 is where we establish this idea of either identity or role confusion, and which is also typically very aligned with adolescence and puberty. And for me, like I didn't really know what my role in life was going to be. And I had all these uncomfortable feelings from, again, what presented like ADHD and presented like social anxiety, which now I believe is actually probably closer to developmental trauma, but the diagnoses still look the same. And so around those adolescent years, I was very uncomfortable in my own skin. And so when my peer groups had a solution to that discomfort, which came in the way of drinking alcohol and using substances and going to parties, it was like, a light bulb went off. It's like, okay, this is how I'm going to self-soothe. And it progressed really quickly for me. It went from cigarettes to THC to alcohol use to taking cough and cold medicine. And by the time I was 14, I was a full blown cocaine addict. And, freshman year of high school and cocaine, they just really don't go well together. I found it hard to make it to high school my freshman year. And I remember I went to my parents and I was like, hey, clearly I have a learning disability and I think we have an issue here. And my parents were like, we agree. We decided that it'd probably be best for me to just get my GED and move on from the traditional school curriculum, so I got my GED and then my addiction just skyrocketed. And then I didn't go to college or grad school until much later.
Well, help us, I mean, if you're okay with it, fill in the gaps, right? You just said, like, I got my GED, right? So we're already choosing a different path, going against the majority, right? Again, in a very archaic educational system. And good for you for having that insight to tell your parents in ninth grade, like, hey, this isn't working, right? Can we all get on the same page about doing something different so I can kind of figure it out? But obviously, addiction does rear its ugly head. And like you said, it kind of took off. So fill us in, honestly, in kind of the bookends of exactly where you're leaving off, jumping all the way forward to like when you went to school, why you went to school at some point later in your life. So kind of fill us in on those late adolescent and early, kind of emerging adult years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I left school and things did not get better for me in doing so. And I hear all the time, right? Like, oh, Joanna has a substance use problem, or Adam has an alcohol problem. And it's like, for me at that time, it was a solution. I was trying to navigate my way through life and wasn't able to do so because like there really was there's not classes in the 8th grade of like how to progress through addiction and mental health and end up as an adaptively normal adult. And so my addiction got much worse. Initially I was using cocaine and smoking a lot of pot and drinking some, but mostly it was the cocaine usage. And then I switched to benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax. And when I turned 16, I had ended up drinking alcohol and taking benzodiazepines, and I'd only had my license for a couple of months, and I decided to drive, and somewhere along the way I must have fallen asleep at the wheel and ended up in this person's their front yard / living room. And I remember I hit my head in the car. I get out of the car, I'm just kind of stumbling around, and I remember this guy saying like, son, can I help you? And I the only thing I could mutter back to him was like, just help me get my car out of your living room and I'll be on my way. And the next thing I know, I wake up handcuffed to a hospital bed, and my mom's at the foot of the bed, and, she looks incredibly worried. And the only thing I could mutter to my mom at that time was, I swear I wasn't drinking. It's like, well, the DUI that you just got says otherwise. So I was put on juvenile probation, and this is, early 2000s, and we weren't really that educated on the opioid epidemic yet. It hadn't hit home yet. And so I was on juvenile probation, but because of the injuries in the car accident, I was allowed to take pain medication. So I went from cocaine and benzodiazepines to opiate medication. And so I spent from 16 to 18 doing opiates, mostly hydrocodone and oxycodone, and then eventually OxyContin and the like. And so I got very addicted to those. The physical addiction to those was like a whole nother level that I hadn't experienced before. And I got off probation, and I was about 18 and 2 weeks old, and my arm had swollen up really bad. It was like double the size it is right now. I didn't know what to do. And about 6 months prior to this, I had started using OxyContin intravenously. And so I went to my pediatrician, right? And I'm like, hey, there's something wrong with my arm. I don't know, it hurts to touch. And she had this, she takes a step back and doesn't really know what to do. She's like, I'll be right back. And she leaves the examination room, and I'm sitting there on that interesting bed and where your feet always dangle. And there's like Blue's Clues on the back of the wall behind me. And I'm just this guy that's been using heroin and Oxycontin for the last 2 years. And she comes back in and says, you've contracted something called necrotizing fasciitis or flesh-eating bacteria, and we have to get you in the operating room to remove your arm or you're going to be dead tomorrow. And I was just like, thinking, I was just hoping that I was going to get some antibiotics and maybe like a sucker at the end of it. And this was not good news for me. So we go to the hospital, go into the operating room. I get to keep the arm. But this is like the first time that my parents actually found out, right? Like before this, they had always kind of given themselves plausible deniability with like, oh, it's really bad pot, or maybe experimented with a psychedelic. And this is the first time that they really wrapped their heads around that, like that there was a serious problem. And so they intervened, and I eventually ended up going to treatment. But it was like a forced intervention. It was like, hey, you have to go, or we're going to figure out a way to press charges against you. Like there was just a lot of like ultimatums. And so I go to this treatment program, based off of my insurance. And I wasn't really, I didn't want to get better. I just wanted everybody to get off my back. And so I go to this treatment program, and I meet this guy, Fernando. And when I get out of the treatment program, I move into the sober living. And Fernando and I almost immediately started doing heroin together. And I remember I'd like run out of money, and we were driving, and I was driving him to go pick up drugs. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I really think, if you ever need me to drive you somewhere, like I don't have any cash, but like I'm an excellent driver, kind of Dustin Hoffman, Rain Man. And he's like, actually, we do need a white boy to drive. I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's kind of a weird way to respond to that question, but okay. And so we go and meet with his buddy Frank. And Frank did not speak any English, so I'm not sure if that was actually his real name. And they're talking amongst themselves. And I didn't speak Spanish at the time. And all I really made out is white boy is going to need his medicine. But they told me to be at this grocery store the next day at a particular time. And so I get to that grocery store, and they hand me 3 envelopes. One had directions in it, one had heroin, and one had some spending money. And then they hand me the keys to an RV. And for the next 6 months, I started driving from that grocery store to Mexico and picking up illegal immigrants and then transporting them back across the border, or sometimes from the border back into the States. And, candidly, it was like probably one of the best jobs I ever had, because they minus the no, they didn't have health benefits, but like, I feel like they really took care of me the best they could. But then they fired me. They fired me for being a junkie, which is like kind of frustrating, because like we talked about that during the interview process. And they fired me. So I called my mom, and I was like, hey, I've got nothing. I need help. And so I moved back in with her and my dad. But by this time in my life, I'm like 19 years old. I've got nothing left, right? Like I've got a GED and a vehicle that like you could start with a butter knife. And then I started using other substances too, like stimulant-based medications and other stimulants in addition to the opiates. And one time I found myself in a grocery store and I probably wasn't operating on all cylinders and was not very cognizant of healthy decisions at the time. And so I'm walking in the grocery store. Lord knows what I was actually even doing there to begin with. But I remember I was like, I don't like the way I feel right now. And I looked over, and the pharmacy was closed, because, the pharmacy will close at like 9 p.m., but the grocery stores are usually open until midnight. I was like, and I had a light bulb go off. I was like, well, everything that could make me feel better is in that room over there. And so I go over to the consultation window and pick the lock. I make my way into the pharmacy, and I take all of the narcotics. I put them in grocery bags, and I take all of the narcotics, and I go back over the consultation window, walk out the front door like nothing ever happened. And I sit in my truck, and I have this like realization. I'm like, okay, this is probably where I get arrested. And nothing happened. Like nobody came. There was no place lights. Like nothing occurred. And so I drove home, and I went into oblivion for a couple of weeks. And then that worked so well that I did it several more times in Flagstaff. On the last pharmacy in Flagstaff, I thought, and by this time I'm using literally every narcotic there is in a pharmacy, plus every drug I could get on the streets. So I was like hearing voices, and I was mostly having auditory hallucinations or delusions of like things that I was not operating in reality. And but it's the last pharmacy, so I thought if I wore a butcher coat, that they would think that I was a pharmacist. And again, been up for few days, not thinking clearly. So I'm like crawling around on this floor and having conversations with the, voices in my head. And I'm taking everything this time, right? Like antibiotics, Viagra, like everything's coming with me. And so I'm walking out of the back of this grocery store with this shopping cart just full of pill bottles falling out of the edges. And these guys stop me. And then next thing you know, some detectives are coming up, and I ended up spending about a year in jail waiting for a plea bargain. And that plea bargain was basically because all of my crimes were drug or addiction related. They said, okay, if you can just do this diversion program, we'll make all of your felonies go away. Because again, I'm a high school dropout with 33 felonies and not much going for me. So I go into that diversion program, and one thing leads to another. And I finally, I get a job at a gym, and, like I knew nothing about exercise or nutrition at the time. But I had started attending these support group meetings, these daily meetings for people that prefer to remain anonymous. And I was signing this guy up that I'd always looked up to. And his name is Brad. For the sake of the podcast, I'll just say Brad S. And Brad, he had a master's degree, and he had a certain way about him. And just the way he walked about life was like really cool, calm, and collected. And he had everything that I thought that I wanted, right? Like he had a good job, he had a car, he owned his home, and he had this like master's degree, which was like a enigma to me. Like I had no idea what that even meant. And he encouraged me to go work at this treatment program. And once I started surrounding myself with people that kept on leveling themselves up, I wanted to mimic what they did, right? Like, it's like, okay, look, pay attention to the people that have what I want and do what they do. And most of those people were in school or going back to school and had advanced degrees. So, I started with going to a college. I went for marketing because, clearly from my adolescence, I have, a clear understanding of equity and, sales. But there just something wasn't jiving with me about that, mostly because of what was going on in the behavioral health industry. I thought it was important that if I was going to participate in this, I should have some more clinically based degrees. And so after I got my undergrad, I went back to school and got a master's in clinical psych. I started with applied coaching, and then I switched my major over to applied clinical psych. And then by that time, I was already on a roll. And so I said, why stop here? And so then I just finished out my doctorate in clinical psychology as well. And so, like from start to finish, here we have, again, a high school dropout with 30 plus felonies and not much going for him. And then by just mimicking the people that had what I wanted, next thing I know, people are referring to me as doctor. So it was kind of by no virtue of my own. I just kept on doing the next indicated thing that was in front of me. It's not like I had some crazy ambition or tenacity that like outshines anyone else. And I sure as shit, sorry for cussing, but I was definitely not the smartest one, right? Like growing up, I was never like the smart one or the athletic one or the good looking one. Like that wasn't my narrative. So really it was just showing up and doing what was expected of me for the first time. So I've definitely rambled far too long. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking too, I'm over here like I constantly am, for my own sake, I'm like, do I go back and get my doctorate? That's not an easy feat. And to get it in clinical psych, no less. Like I don't want you to minimize your intelligence in that category, because yes, you were on a roll. Once you kind of started, might as well just keep leveling up, like you said. But the reality is, oh my gosh, I'm constantly impressed because now that I know your educational journey, which I think is also obviously in parallel to kind of your own personal recovery story, it makes perfect sense how you are where you are right now, the work that you're doing. And I do appreciate it because it's very rare that I see somebody, and I was on mute as you were kind of tongue in cheek saying that, I went and got my bachelor's in marketing because I was really good at sales. Like you understood that. There's a lot of people that work in outreach or business development that do have backgrounds in that side of the business, but it's really hard to understand the nature of the work that is being done in behavioral health, trauma treatment, addiction treatment, if you don't have baseline information or knowledge about human development or psychology, like period. So I'm saying all of this as a nod to you in the path that you went on, and kind of just expressing my appreciation and gratitude for the knowledge and expertise that you have, because to me, ideally, you are also being looked at as a mentor in kind of, again, business development, outreach, marketing, kind of whatever roles that exist for programs. But the journey and again, the baseline knowledge that you have, hopefully other people are looking at you and choosing to level up in that regard.
Yeah, and I have appreciation for, bottom line is I definitely am under the impression that if people are doing clinical work, then it's important that they're clinically trained. However, there are a lot of ways to participate in the behavioral health industry in ways that are very helpful and that don't require post-secondary education. And so when somebody does ask, like, okay, what should I do? My biggest suggestion or encouragement is just do your own work, whatever that might look like. It might mean going to therapy. It might mean going and doing trauma work. And for a lot of people, it really is education, because when we take a look at that existential psychology in what initiates the uninitiated, we have this whole concept behind the hero's journey, right? That archetypal hero journey of how do we go from adolescence into our adulthood. And most cultures historically have always had this, a ritual behind that. And I think, not necessarily America in particular, but in society at large, we've kind of lost that, right? It's like we've lost those defining moments of like, okay, you're an adult now. And education is kind of the perfect metaphor for how to step out of our comfort zone, push ourselves to the limits, and have that rite of passage. And it doesn't have to be education. It can come in many different forms. I mean, one of the most amazing rites of passage that I've seen people do is overcome or address their mental health and addiction issues. Some people go into the military. Some people, have families. Some people build careers. But I think we're probably going to look back on the current generation and really the last 15 years of the generation of lost boys, because we have lost that rite of passage, right? And so we have a lot of people just whistling their way through the dark, not really sure how to do this thing called life. And that's because, again, we've lost that ritualistic nature of that rite of passage of the hero's journey. I don't know have you read Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell?
Yeah. And I'll make sure I actually put a link in it, because I always appreciate references that are brought up in individual interviews, because I never know what to expect, right? What little nugget or resource a guest is recommending or suggesting. So we'll make sure that that's in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, or you can put in the link to Star Wars. It's like all throughout history and comparative mythology, we have these pivotal moments in a person's life that are pretty key to how to initiate the hero. Like, how do we show up in our life? And ironically, there's actually 12 phases of that hero's journey, of that wheel, but it can be really whittled down to 3, which is separation, initiation, and return. And we have to separate from our comfort zone, pick up positive social peers and a mentor, and or a teacher or an instructor, whatever it may be. And then we have to experience that conflict. We have to experience that fork in the road. Okay, do I keep pushing forward even though that this is really hard, or do I just give up and turn back and go back to my comfort zone? And once we push forward, then we can essentially go into that innermost cave, seize a sword, and then return as the hero. And really, most stories that we've ever heard always follow that theme, whether it be Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, every Disney movie. It's always the same theme. There's always this constant pattern, and there's actually some science behind that's how our brains can interpret stories. And so when we have someone like Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino create a movie that deviates from that narrative, that's why we really enjoy the film so much, because it's hard for us to figure out what's going on, because we haven't been ingrained with that storytelling, the way that we absorb stories for so long. Anyways, I'm digressing, but you catch the drift. George Lucas read Hero with a Thousand Faces and then wrote the screenplay for Star Wars. So if somebody really wants to know what the hero's journey is all about, just watch the first 3 movies.
We'll have links to those too in the show notes. Well, I just appreciate that you said that we are dealing with a generation of people that are whistling in the dark, right? They don't have these they don't have these experiences and they're really struggling, lost completely. And so obviously, or maybe not so obvious, but I'm saying that right now, you are not that person, but we are working with these people. So why don't you actually tell us right now, what are you doing? Where are you working? What are you doing?
So I work with a program called the Guest House in Ocala, Florida. What we do is we treat people with trauma, PTSD, and complex PTSD, and also all the maladaptive behaviors that come along with that, right? So we're not a drug rehab, we're not an eating disorder program. We're a residential trauma program that addresses those medicating behaviors. So like when we talked about like, oh, Joanna has an addiction problem or Adam has an alcohol problem, it's like, no, that's a medicating behavior because humans are resilient by nature. And so we find a way to soothe ourselves, right? And more often than not, people experience childhood trauma. And because of attachment disorders and a lot of the concepts around attachment theory, we have to find a way to soothe ourselves. And so we will do that by any means necessary. And for a lot of people, it will be engaging in something like some sort of compulsion, right? Like addiction of some sort. And even depression and anxiety are addictive in nature, right? There's still a payoff in all of that. And so the Guest House is a 30 to 90 day program where we start to address that, right? So it's like rather than addressing the solution or rather than addressing the medicating behavior that somebody's engaging in, why don't we address why they're engaging it to begin with? Because when people hear the word trauma, they immediately assume physical violence, sexual assault, natural disaster. And what we know now is that trauma is much more complex than that. Trauma can be neglect, abandonment, emotional abuse. There's everybody that watched the towers fall on September 11th, 2001 knows exactly where they were because our hippocampus wasn't able to process that imagery that night. It wasn't able to process it the way that it normally would. And so therefore we have these unprocessed memories. And then we have physiological changes within the brain structure, with the neural pathways. And so then essentially we have these different ego states that splinter off. And so anyways, this is what the Guest House does, is the Guest House addresses it in a multitude of different ways, right? Whether it be a car accident when we were 23, the loss of a loved one 6 months ago, or some significant critical incidents that might have happened to us as children, is why don't we start addressing and unpacking that now so we can stop carrying that? Because, we've talked about some different diagnoses. I hear diagnoses every day: major depressive disorder, ADHD, generalized anxiety, substance use disorder, feeding disorders, whatever. And more often than not, what I'm actually hearing people say is they feel stuck. And what the Guest House is the best at is the art of getting people unstuck.
Well, and having heard all of that too, now I'm just going to ask you this question point blank. Do you see yourself as successful?
It's subjective, right? To the day, and it depends. I mean, in some ways, the days that I feel successful are the days that I am present and playing with my son at the trampoline park, right? And the rest of the world just ceases to exist, and I'm in that moment, and I'm being a good dad, and I'm showing up as the adult or as the man that I want to be. And so, yes, I do feel that is like a part of being successful. Do I feel very unsuccessful when I'm having a rough day and I'm tired and I'm driving in traffic and I'm not, responding to the world the way that I'd like to? There's always room for improvement, but I don't view myself as successful because I went to school or because I have a career, right? Like, I know a lot of people that have what I want, like as far as success in their life, and it has nothing to do with those concepts. It has everything to do with their quality of life and how they show up for the people around them.
Well, and then I was just going to say, that's exactly why I love asking this question, because it is 100% open to interpretation based on your values. And for the people that are actually critical thinkers, sometimes it is challenging to be, this question is almost asked to just have a simple yes or no response, when in reality, it's so much more complicated than that. And so I just appreciate you taking the time to really think through that, how you would respond. So now that we've heard all of that, if you could give one piece of advice to a young person, let's say it is like Adam circa 18, 19 years old, someone like that, what piece of advice, or if that's too specific, if you want to just broaden it, you totally can. But if you could give one piece of advice to a young adult who's struggling, what advice would you give them?
Just lean into the process and never stop learning, really. And because so much, and still to this day, like I'm back in adolescence and 18, 19 and 2025, like I've always been convinced that like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know the answer to this. And then when I look back on that part of my life, I'm like, no, I really didn't, like I was just a boy whistling in the dark, hoping for the best and trying to figure it out. But I will say that as far as as it pertains specifically to the question around education, it doesn't have to be traditional education, but there's something about doing our own work, and that does involve learning, right? Whether that be attending a seminar or a training or going to traditional college or online school, whatever. But there's a lot of it. You cannot ice skate uphill, right? Like you can't. And so there's just this idea that perseverance and tenacity will carry us a really far way.
So with all of that too, thank you. I think that was pretty profound. And also I'm just like stuck here thinking like, oh, you can't really ice skate uphill? I had to like think about that for a second. That was where my brain went for a second. So let's say somebody wants to reach out to you, whether it's to connect, to inquire about enrollment with the guest house, or whether it's to connect with you, like, Adam, I could really use you in my life as a mentor, as a guide, kind of through my journey right in this moment, or just literally like, I want to say thank you, right? Like you appreciate your vulnerability, sharing part of your journey. As somebody who just listened to it, thank you for speaking up. How do people connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is through my cell phone. Text messaging just seems to be the most efficient way to actually connect with me, and 928-600-5488. Also, people contact us on social media right now. But currently, the easiest way to contact me on social is through Instagram, which is the Guest House Ocala is the handle.
And we'll make sure we have your phone number and that social media handle and the website too in the show notes. So anybody can reach out to you at any point. Hopefully we don't get any spammers that are just starting to blow up your phone. Now you're getting text messages about pillows or some shit like that.
Yeah. I mean, it happens pretty frequently, but and I'm always available. I mean, my career is anything but traditional or usual and customary, right? Like I'll take a nap during midday, but then take a crisis call at 9 p.m. So
yeah, well, that's your purpose too, right? And your strength is being able to do that. So I, as somebody that works kind of in the referring space, I appreciate your availability. And again, who you are as a person, showing up personally and professionally to be able to serve those that are in that kind of place of seeking guidance and support. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it wasn't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for the next episode where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guests. And also put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, at successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to Success is Subjective on any other popular podcast apps such as Amazon, Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. And last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener supported, made possible by me and by you. You can show support for the continuation of this podcast by donating on the successissubjective.org website. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.